So glad that you've joined us here for this first forum on the gospel and race, and really just blown away by the amount of folks who are here and willing to engage in this conversation. What a joy it is to be able to come together. My name is Jamin Stinziano. I'm one of the pastors here at Summit Church, and I get to welcome you here, and then I'll kind of navigate through the evening as kind of the MC, and I get the easy part of the night. But I want to just kind of let you know a little bit about why we're doing this and why we've gathered here for a time like this. Let you know just kind of the ground rules of how we'll move forward and a little bit of information. So first of all, if you are a visitor, welcome. You may at one point or another want to use a bathroom, and that's an understandable thing. They're hard to find here if you're new, so to find a restroom, you're just going to go out that door, out that entrance, down those stairs, and right outside at the bottom of those stairs over there, you're going to find men's and women's and also a family bathroom, so you can feel free to go use that at any time, and that won't disrupt anything. Don't worry about that. What we'll do as we kind of move through tonight is, first, I want to introduce to you Charlie Mitchell. He's not going to come up yet, but Charlie is the planting pastor of Epiphany Church, Baltimore. Charlie is a friend to Summit Church and a man that I have a lot of respect for. I spent a few days with Charlie and Jim Hines, who's also on our staff, up in Camden, and really learned a lot from Charlie in those hours that we were together, those days that we were together. And so ever since we spent that time together, it's kind of been in our heart to have an event like this and to have Charlie specifically join us for it, because Charlie's from Fort Myers area. He grew up here. Some of you even know Charlie. Probably went to school with him and saw him as a kid, and now here he is as a man. And we wanted him to give us his perspective on a young man who has grown up in Southwest Florida in a predominantly black culture where he lived, but then as part of a good portion of his life being part of really majority white churches. And so we are a church here at Summit that wants to be faithful. We want to proclaim the gospel. We want to declare the gospel. We want to take hold of the gospel. We want to know what the gospel really does in us. And one of the things that it does is it gives us eyes to see things through the lens of the cross. It gives us ears to hear things through Jesus as our filter. And then as we move, we want to move in such a way where we're moving in a way that's consistent and reflective of who Jesus is. Not just who he was, but Jesus is still alive. He reigns, and his spirit is inside of his people. And so wherever we go, the gospel goes, and we have the opportunity to act in the spirit of Christ. And so we want to do that in every area of our life, but tonight specifically, we want to do that in the conversation of race. Race is something that continues to be a sticking point for this nation. And it's not that race is a bad thing. Race is actually a really good thing. It's how God has designed things. God has made every man, woman, and child unique and with distinctive things about them and their culture. That's a wonderful thing. But we're also part of the human race. And if you're a Christian, you're part of the family of God. And so we are one. So though we are one, we are many, and we are different. So that's a good thing. But the difficulty is we've lost sight of how to talk about these things and how to actually engage with these things in a Christ-honoring way. Oftentimes we approach conversations like this with our fist up. Do you know what I'm talking about? We approach conversations like this wanting to either prove ourselves right or not have any buttons pushed or our toes stepped on, when in all reality what we probably need is to just be humble and receive whatever it is that God wants to do in us and whatever he wants to say to us. So some of the ground rules tonight are we're coming into this place humble. We're coming into this place as a family. And I understand if you aren't a part of Summit Church, you might say, well, I'm not a part of this family, and I get that. But what we've done is we've invited you into a family meal, a family meeting. And so we're glad that you're here, and we're just letting you know how we're going to try to carry ourselves in this time. We're going to try to be humble, and we're going to listen. We're going to take the posture of a listener, someone who wants to hear and receive, and someone who is willing to have good things and hard things said to us. None of us want to be the type of people that only receive good things, right? You know those types of people that can only hear things that are good about them. We want to be men, women, and children who receive even things that are hard to hear, and allow the Spirit of God to change us with those things. And so that's the hope behind this evening. We recently did a survey here at Summit Church, and part of that survey, many of you took it. You might remember you went online and you took this survey if you're a part of Summit, and it tells us the ethnic breakdown of Summit Church. And I don't think you'd be surprised if you knew that 90% of the people who call Summit Church home are Caucasian. They are white. About 6% of the individuals who call Summit Church home are Hispanic or of Latino descent. That's a surprising number to me, that it's not actually higher. About 2%, and that's a barely 2%, would be African American or black, and then the other percentage would make up Asian and Native American and other folks like that. And so we look at a church like Summit and we say, okay, that's what it is. It's a majority white church. It's more than a majority white church. It's almost all white. And I'm sure for some of you it feels like that. And we've had folks in the past that have been brave enough to let us know, as a person of color, as a person from a different background, sometimes it's hard for me to worship at Summit Church, or to come in and be ministered to at Summit Church, or to listen. And it wasn't because they were saying, we can't listen to you, a white person. It's more so because they're saying, I just feel like my experiences and the way that I have experienced the world and navigated through the world and seen the world and been affected by the world, those things aren't really understood by my pastors and by most of the people in our church. So when things happen in culture, maybe sometimes we don't address them in a way that really faithfulness demands, and in a way that would be honoring to our brothers and sisters who are from a different culture or a different race makeup. And so we want to be a church that really is diverse in whatever way that God provides. We don't want to force diversity, but we want to be open to it, and we want to cultivate an environment where every man, woman, and child could truly be a part of this church and not feel as though they are isolated or marginalized by the majority of the people that are here, but instead welcomed in and embraced. And I think the only way we're going to get there is if we actually have the conversations of what that actually takes and what that looks like and what that means for us as a body. It only is going to happen if we are willing to say, okay, what is really happening? What is really going on? And are we willing to be impacted and even made uncomfortable if need be for the sake of the gospel? I don't know about you, but I want to be made uncomfortable for the sake of the gospel. And it's easy for me to say in a night like this, ooh, I went to a gospel and race conversation. So look at me. But it goes way farther than that, doesn't it? And so what we're asking is, God, would you do that? God, would you show us? We're not expecting to have all the answers tonight. We are not thinking in any way that we're going to leave this place and suddenly be this culturally diverse church. But instead, we're saying, God, what are the practical steps forward? God, what are the steps forward, just small steps forward that we can take to get after your mission the way that you have called us to get after it? You see on the screen there this opportunity to submit your questions. What's going to happen in just a few moments is I'm going to welcome Charlie up, and for about 15 minutes or so, Charlie's just going to tell his story. And he's going to share some observations. I asked him to tell us about his family, to tell us about himself as a man, tell us about really his upbringing and his church experience and culture and all that stuff. So wherever he wants to go with that, he's going to go there. Then after that, we're going to have a time where it will just be myself and Charlie here, and I have some questions, some already written out questions that I want to ask Charlie. Specifically dealing, and I'm just going to let you know right now, with the issues of privilege and power and poverty. Now, when I told Charlie those things, he was like, oh man, what are you doing to me? Like, I feel like you're setting me up. No, I'm not setting you up. I want to put those things out there because I think we need to talk about them honestly. And so we're going to talk about those things. And then after that, we'll move into a time, a more so discussion of questions. I'll have Orlando come up as well, and it'll be Orlando, myself, and Charlie. And I'll have the opportunity to ask the questions that you all submit here at this link. You can submit your questions anonymously. There's an option to do that. Or you can put your name on it if need be, or if you want to. But I'll have the opportunity to receive all those on my iPad. I'll go through those questions. Those questions, I'm sure, will lead me to some other questions. And that's kind of how we'll do it tonight. After the evening is over, we will be here. If you want to continue to have discussion, if you continue to want to talk, that's great. We're shooting for 7:45 to be done here. I know some of you have kids and you might feel like you need to go. That's totally fine. This is a free evening. You go whenever you want to go. But we hope that you will be blessed in your time here. Before I welcome Charlie up, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we thank you so much for who you are. God, you are a good, good Father. And we are loved by you. We know that. And God, we are sons and daughters of yours. And so we have come looking to our dad, looking to our Father, asking you how we should now live. And so God, knowing that you are the type of Father that if your children ask for something that they need, that you will give it and you will give it generously. God, we believe tonight that you will give it to us generously. God, that you would show us what you want to show us tonight, that you would just grant us the grace of having the eyes that you want us to have, the ears that you want us to have. God, that you would really help us navigate through this night as we look at culture and as we look at the context around us and as we consider what it looks like to be faithful here in Southwest Florida and every other place that we go. God, I pray that there would be a sense, a spirit of humility here this evening. God, that none of us would think we have all the answers, but instead we would be willing to receive from our brothers and our sisters. God, if there are any here tonight from the community, maybe they're not part of another church or any gospel expression tonight, God, I ask that you would just show them who you are and show them how we as your people desire to live. And God, I ask that you would impress your glory, yourself upon each and every one of us in this place. God, we do pray for Charlie and ask that you'd give him wisdom as he speaks to us. God, that you would give him grace as he speaks to us. And God, that you would really give him a confidence to speak exactly what needs to be spoken. Father, we love you. We thank you. We pray for all the things going around our world. I think of New York City right now. We pray for that city. God, I saw that something happened in Minnesota last night that I wasn't aware of this morning. And God, we lift up the folks there who have been affected by that tragedy. And Father, we ask that you would be glorified in making yourself known in all of those things. God, be with us now, and it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. So I want to encourage you, as Charlie shares, feel free to go to that link right there. Submit your questions. Without your questions, this evening will not go very far. So this is the way we need to have that discussion. So put your questions in. Also this, we've never done a gospel and race forum, so you know what? We're probably going to mess up. Can we just have a little bit of grace? I'm scared to death of saying the wrong thing. I'm just going to be honest with you. I need a lot of grace here, and I know Charlie does too, and so we trust that you'll give it to us. Hey, why don't you welcome with me right now Pastor Charlie Mitchell.
It's on now. Okay. Well, thank you for having me. And Summit, you guys have been such a blessing to me. So I'm honored, and this is a huge privilege to be here to share in this time with you. But from the onset, I would say that, I'm not a historian. I'm not a sociologist, as much as I would love to go and get my master's from FGCU in sociology and study, wealth and race and culture. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a race baiter. I'm not any of those things. I just happen to be a Christian who is African American. And so I love God's people, and I'm a pastor, and I'm a all right theologian. And so Pastor Jamin's much better than I am. He's Dr. Jamin, and I'm just Charlie. So have some grace on us tonight. And I don't intend to talk with a bunch of statistics and stats and all historical facts. I'm not interested in trying to prove anything, but I am interested in having a good conversation. Is that okay? So if you're nervous and you're like, man, I don't know, all right. So it's going to be interesting. I will say, because I will at times, I haven't told Pastor Jamin this, We will use the N-word at some point, just because it has been a part of the discussion. And so I'm not using it flagrantly, but I'm using it because it is a potent and powerful thing that has been a part of my story. And so I just want that to be known up front. I'm not trying to do something or cause a reaction unnecessarily. I just want us to go into the realities of this particular conversation. So just be aware of that. So just a bit of my story I just want to share for a second. You might want to put me on the clock because I'm black with a microphone and I'm a Baptist preacher, and so it's very bad. So that's okay? All right, good. And I've already got like 5 minutes in, so y'all have messed up. So my story is this. I'm 33 years old, born in Key West, Florida. There's not too many people born in Key West, and so I was one of the few people that have been born in Key West and raised in Harlem Heights off Gladiolas Drive. Went to Heights Elementary School, went to Gateway Elementary School, went to Three Oaks Middle School, graduated from Cypress Lake Center for the Arts, and went to Edison for a little bit until we moved to till I moved to New Jersey a year and a half ago. So that's just so you know, I know a little bit about this area. And I'm from South Florida. I'm from the South. But I would back up a little bit. The reason I was born in Key West is because my father was a commercial fisherman. He was a shrimper by trade, which meant that we traveled around quite a bit. So a lot of people say, man, Charlie, what's your sports team? We didn't have a sports team simply because we moved all the time. So we were born in Key West. I was born there, lived there for a couple of years. Then we lived in St. Augustine for a while, lived there for several years. Habitat for Humanity happened to be building houses in Harlem Heights. Therefore, we moved from St. Augustine and moved back to Harlem Heights where my mother is from. But to give you a bit of context for my general, bigger history from a more of a racial perspective is this. My grandfather, Dandy Mitchell, we are descendants, direct descendants of those who came over on slave ships to Charleston. And so we are connected to those who are in Sierra Leone in West Africa. There are still those people in those pockets. My father was born on the island of Wadmalaw, and so there's this rich, old, historic community of African Americans who were brought here specifically to work in fields. So my grandfather is buried right now on the Charleston Tea Plantation. I'm not talking about 500 years ago. I'm talking about the man who gave birth to my father. So he is buried now. We cannot see his grave because it's in an unmarked grave of those who were buried on a plantation. So that was the context in which my father grew up. And they got into the trade of fishing and shrimping and doing commercial fisherman stuff. My mother was born in South Georgia. And before she passed away, we never knew how old she was. We didn't know how old she was because it was not recorded, the births of African American children at that time. So she grew up not knowing really, so we celebrated her birthday on Martin Luther King Day and St. Patrick's Day. So there were several years where it was like, Mom, I think we just had your birthday. No, it's today. So we had those times of just understanding that, man, listen, our history is not far off. This is very close to home for us, the conversations of race and culture and ethnicity and the threat of white power and supremacy. So my father, he did some things that were rough because made some allegiances and got into some secret societies outside of Charleston because there was a threat of those Ku Klux Klan members who would come that if you were affiliated with certain societies, you would not have crosses burned in your yard. And so he always taught me, he died by the time I was 13, he had taught me with there was a sense of distrust for white people. My mother, on the other hand, she moved here when she was a child, went to Franklin Park Elementary School for 1, maybe 2 years, but it was realized very quickly that she was more valuable working in the fields around Harlem Heights. So if you know anything historically about this area, when you go down Gladiolus Drive, there's all kinds of houses now. But when we were growing up, those were just fields all over the place. There's still like 1 or 2 you-pick strawberry fields. But growing up, those were the fields that my mom worked as a child. So she went through life functionally illiterate, never getting past a 3rd grade education. My father never getting past a middle school education because they had to work in fields and not go to school. So they had, we had children, they went on. I was born later on in life. We lived in Fort Myers, grew up here. Now listen, early on, I realized that there were some racial disparities, not necessarily because of what was taught to me directly by my parents, but because of what was happening outside. I remember specifically in 3rd grade beating a kid in a race and being called a nigger. So somewhere along the line, I go home and say, Mom, this boy called me this. I don't know what this means. I don't really understand that. But what's going on with that, Charlie? That was my introduction to this racial kind of conversation. That was another young black man. That was a white child that had said those words to me. So we go through life. I remember specifically going to middle school, and we went to a predominantly African-American church. Our neighborhood is predominantly African-American, Puerto Rican. So all of my friends were African-American, Puerto Rican, never really having any kind of thing. But I remember I was in the magnet program, and we got to go to school at Three Oaks Middle School because they had a magnet program, and I could do the arts and all kinds of cool stuff. But I remember in 7th grade, we were going to have a race riot. That as a 7th grader riding on the bus from Harlem Heights, being the only African American on the bus, riding all the way to Three Oaks, I remember having a sock full of pennies because that's what you were supposed to have. And although we were friends on the bus, when we got out to school, we had to go our separate ways. That's middle school. And so this reality, this kind of tension of racial stuff kind of went on. Now, as I graduated high school, had all kinds of friends, was in the arts program, never really thought much about it, went and lived in Europe for 2 years in a program called Master's Commission in Copenhagen, Denmark. What I realized was that was my first sense of having culture shock, where up to that point, I had never felt the racial disparity too much, the cultural uniqueness, if you will, because I could flow in and out of different cultures. As an African American, listen, I know how to operate within predominantly white cultures. It's cool because what happened was we were at a traditionally black church in Dunbar. They didn't have youth programs. My mom wanted to help me to grieve the death of my father. Therefore, she brought us over to First Assembly of God, a predominantly white church. And man, I was discipled, I was loved, I was cared for. What allowed for her to do that, my father was hesitant. He had passed away, so she was freed up to be able to do that. But what allowed her also to do that is that she had been reconciled to Christ. So the resentment and the skittishness and the mistrust of white people had kind of been broken down because of the work of the gospel in her life. So where we had been living in separate worlds, now there began to be deeper, more intimate relationships built through my mother, and she allowed us to go into these spaces that were not what we were used to, but now we were able to kind of flow. So we learned, as you will, the King's English. We go to school. I went to school in predominantly white communities, Gateway Elementary School. I was the first kid on the first day that it opened, dropped off by my father. So you learn the King's English, but then you're able to go home at night and rest your head in your own comfort zone where we can watch Martin and In Living Color, and we can laugh and we can watch Comic View and BET. And then we go back to work the next day and we learn to operate within this different culture. Now, when I was 19, living in Europe, now I'm without a safe space. So I remember getting on the phone at times and having this kind of mental breakdown because I would get into rooms or I would have conversations and I would be constantly thinking about what I would have to say or how I could articulate myself in order that I would be understood, because I would hate the fact that you would say to me, man, Charlie, what did you say? You're mumbling. I can't understand you when you talk like that. And so these were hard things. I'm just going, man, and I realized I didn't have that safe place to go home at night. And so I would get on the phone. Just this past weekend, I was here in Fort Myers. I laid to rest my oldest sister. And so I would call my oldest sister to have someone just to talk to. She would make me laugh. And what would happen? All my white friends would gather around to hear me talk because I talked funny, because it was different all of a sudden, because now we can see something about you that's different from when you're usually with us. And I went through this kind of crisis as a young adult, 19 years old. And so you're just kind of frustrated and you're angry. And so it led me into, even though I was in a Christian discipleship program, even though I'm supposed to be growing in my understanding of the Lord and Jesus, man, it's becoming hard for me because it seems like they just don't care to understand where I'm coming from. They just don't care. How is it that I know references to Friends and Seinfeld and I know about Aerosmith, but you know nothing about where I come from? So that led me into, just for a short period, I would listen to the Pan-Africanists and I would listen to the Farrakhan's and the Malcolm X's, because at some point it gave me a sense of nobility and pride and dignity in who I was, because I felt like an alien, an exile, someone different, when I had worked my whole life to be someone who was included. And so then I fall in love in this program. My wife, her name is Erin. We've been married now 12 years. And she is from a town in central Wisconsin, a town of 5,000 people. I was the first African American she had ever had a conversation with. While now I kind of, I got polo on and, I kind of keep myself together. At that point, I had long dreadlocks. I wore a big medallion chain, very bright, loud, because I was black and I was proud. I would play James Brown in my room on Saturdays just to frustrate all the white people. And so, Charlie, why are you always bringing up race? Because I'm black and I'm proud. That's why. And so, but we fell in love. We became best friends, unified in our suffering. We were unified based on our loss of fathers. She had lost her father her senior year of high school. I had lost my father my 8th grade year, and therefore we became these close friends, and we fell in love. Culturally distinct from one another. She is ultra white. I call her Snow White, Snowflake, all of that. She's culturally white. I had to teach her who Michael Jackson was. Like, she was just, I'm like, Michael Jackson? You have no clue you don't know what Billie Jean is? Like, I've made a huge mistake, like. But what has happened is, man, we fell in love and we're the best of friends. Her mother had some tension with it. My mother had reservations about it. We came back to Fort Myers. What does my mom say? Listen, I love Erin and how y'all are together, but listen, I'm nervous about you going to North Fort Myers to see your friends because, they're a little Charlie, you know that when we used to go across the Whiskey Creek Bridge, like we remember the signs that after dark you couldn't go that way. So son, I love Erin and she's great, but be careful. And so this was our beginnings. And it was several years, 7, 8 years, before my wife even understood the complexities of what we had gotten ourselves into. She would tell me, Charlie, they just need to get themselves together. Why do black people always complain? Because, they just need to get a job and get over it. Charlie, why? Same old thing. Charlie, can't they just, it's a free country. Like, there's no reason we should be complaining and all these things. And Charlie, you're just being too sensitive that the waiter treated us differently. No, there's not that happening. And one day, as she was walking with my baby boy Trip, he was just a baby, 6 months old. She was walking up to Publix on San Carlos before you get to the beach. She's walking up and a man calls her a nigger lover. You see how old my oldest son is? He's 5. This isn't the 50s. And at that moment, all the things that Charlie had been saying, all the sensitive remarks, now she's going, Charlie, maybe there is something. When I get around my friends, and she was a nurse, and she would hear the comments that would be said at work, and she would hear as a waitress the comments that would be said about the black patrons at the table, and she began to see, like, they don't know I'm married to a black man. And so in our life and in our marriage, we begin to ponder, Lord, we can't stay in Fort Myers. My children may be forced to become either black or white, and I don't want them to have to choose between being black or white. They are who they are. But what pressed us was this. We have to go to a liberal place. Let's move to Austin. Let's move to Seattle. Let's move to New York, where they can be who they are, and they can have multi-ethnic friends, and man, maybe the Lord will do something, and that they can grow up and not have to worry about this race stuff. For some reason, the Lord called us to inner city ministry, called us to go to Baltimore, a predominantly African-American city that is very volatile, that has had historically some of the worst segregation laws ever. That every stereotypical thing you can think about an inner city impoverished area, it meets the metrics. And now we go into this black community, and what do? Our biggest concern is not necessarily convincing white people anymore to come to the table, but helping African Americans to continue the conversation, regardless of if white people ever listen. So I used to be on the side of, let me help the white people to understand so that they get what we're talking. No. We're past that now. Now I'm at the point where I'm pulling, now I'm being a sellout for doing this. I believe in my heart and soul, if there's a dude that wants to get at me 3 years from now that's a Pan-Africanist in Baltimore, he will look up this particular service, me talking into the camera, and he will use this against me to say that I'm an Uncle Tom for having this conversation with you. And now I'm sitting here trying to pull African Americans to say, no, bro, listen, we can work this out. But I've seen it at work in my home. I've seen it at work in my life. White people have been critical, pivotal in the formation of who I am today. And now as we go forward, I say, let us continue this conversation because I know the power of the gospel in the midst of all of that. How is it that Charlie could still have the conversation? I know that if Jesus pushed away from the conversation, I wouldn't be here right now. So he didn't push away from me and my sin, so therefore I can't push away from you and your slowness to come to the reality that there is racial tension and that we can be unified under the banner of Christ even in the midst of our differences. So we can begin.
Thanks, Charlie. I know just sitting back there, I was writing stuff down. I know anytime I have the opportunity to talk to you and just kind of listen, I learn so much. And I feel like we all are learning something here. This is the casual portion of the night, where we're going to get casual, like two dudes just hanging out at a high-top table talking about poverty, power, and privilege.
Yes, yes.
So, so let's talk about poverty. Let's start with poverty. So, poverty obviously knows no race. It affects everyone, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, and all the other makeups of ethnicity. But specifically with black culture and African Americans, how does poverty play into the cycle of what sometimes we see or think is there? And how ought that be addressed in a gospel-formed way?
Caveat, 1 second.
Okay.
All views and opinions expressed by Charlie Mitchell are for Charlie Mitchell alone. I do not speak for... I don't
You don't speak for who?
I don't speak for all black people. So I speak for me.
Or for Summit Church?
Or for Summit Church.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Any comments, any questions, comments, concerns, my name is Jamin Ciziano.
Yeah.
You can email me.
Yeah.
Tomorrow morning, you can email me.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, I'm not, and that's true. I'm not speaking on behalf of all black people. I'm speaking on behalf of Charlie, because you just heard my story. So this is my perspective on it. Poverty affects everybody, but I think poverty came as a result of sin ultimately. So let's go there. It came as a result of sin. This is not how men and women were meant to live on this earth. Now, but poverty, especially in the African American community, is, I think, unique because there are some internal cyclical things that take place. So, for instance, when my father passed away, I was a single, we lived in a single-parent home, obviously. 13 years old, African American, in a rough neighborhood, whose older brother was already involved in the drug trade and pretty successful at it. Everything in my environment said that's the route to go. There's some internal things that promote that. What would be the cycle? What would be the cycle? I don't have a father. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to act. Therefore, I gotta go out and be a man because my mom needs help. In my situation, my mother was illiterate. So my father had to teach me at 12 years old how to write checks so that when you went to Publix, your mother would not be embarrassed. So what you do is you say, son, when your mom goes up there, she's going to pull out the checkbook and you're going to write in the thing, the margins, and you're going to say, Mom, let me do that. I just learned how to do this in school. We had this whole theatrical drama that we had prepared so that my mom wouldn't be embarrassed. That's a lot of pressure for a 13-year-old. I had a younger brother and a younger sister at home. It's a lot of pressure when you're worried about how the lights is going to work and how we going to eat. Mama's got to work and we got homework and we got all this and that. There's a lot of concerns. So when you have people outside that are making hundreds of dollars a day, thousands of dollars a week, that makes good sense. And not from an evil, I hate, I just want to destroy my community. I'm just trying to get over on people. But no, my family needs. We want Merry Christmas. I want good things. I want to have something of substance. And so, man, we go out to make a little bit of money. And so that's the internal portion that African Americans, man, there is, for me, there were some pulls. There were some desires. There were some physical needs that I wanted to address. But also, externally, why is it that my neighborhood was kind of secluded from the rest of everything that was going on in the development of South Fort Myers? So how is it that, man, when we would drive down Gladiolas, there would seem to be these trees that kind of shrubbed around it, and then you go into this little neighborhood where there's still shacks where people who were working in those fields, A&W Bulb Road was a plant company where people would pick gladiolas. My mom picked gladiolas, cucumbers, tomatoes, all of that. And so why is it that they had to build a neighborhood, get this, on top of a dump? What was going on in this culture and in the society that allowed for this just microcosm of a neighborhood to just be separated or segregated from the rest of the community? So there was two, and so that's what I mean. There's an external thing that's happening that has secluded this group of people, but there's also an internal thing that's happening to where I'm desiring the street life in order that we may have a life. So.
Was literally built on a dump.
Literally built on a dump. How many of you go to Kelly Road, soccer field? I've been there. Yep. That's a garbage dump. The reason it's built up high is because they dug out all the garbage from a landfill that was there. You can't put stakes in the ground. They say don't put stakes in the ground. It could release methane gas because it was built. So children, what is that like? What is it like to grow up as a child in a neighborhood where you're walking around barefoot, mind you? You're going swimming in lakes, mind you, in the middle of a garbage dump. So I think that's what internally, there's no hope. Yeah. So poverty, it continues to eat away at people because you just don't have hope.
Yeah. So a recent Wall Street Journal article, I think I mentioned it here at one point, marks Fort Myers metro area, Fort Myers, Cape Coral, Lee County, as the #1 area where income segregation is the worst. So the rich are richer, the poor are poorer here, more than any of the other 100 major metropolitan areas in America. We know that's not just black, right? There's white, there's Hispanic. So it's not just a black issue, but what is it is there something that keeps people in that, from your opinion? Is there something that keeps someone in that lower classification of income and everything else? Are there certain barriers that, I know there are, but what would you see them to be?
You just don't have the access. You just don't have the networks. You just don't know. My mom doesn't know who to call, like to get you into school. We don't have people that have graduated. We don't have people that are successful in business who've started entrepreneurial ventures that go outside of their own home. You just don't have the access. And that's because historically all you knew was who you knew. Especially here in the South, I just know my community of people, and as you said, most of our networks come from education. When you go to school, most of our friends came from, we were in school, we were in class. What's the big deal about getting a master's degree, a PhD? Man, I'm in class with other influential people. So my network, my social capital just naturally grows. And so that's a big barrier. We don't know what to do. Second, there's a limit in...
Can I say to that really quick?
Yeah.
I think if I were listening to you probably a couple years ago, I would have heard that and thought, I still don't get it. And I think there's got to be something more, and I'm not really buying it, Charlie. And I would imagine that there are some people here.
Yeah.
Doing foster care, being in the foster system, trying to help the families, some of which are in poverty. Vicki and I have found how maddening it is trying to get things done from the perspective of someone who's in poverty. And so we've moved from, well, why don't they make a change in their life, to what in the world, how could they ever be expected to break through these barriers? Things that I never would have thought about. Never, ever, ever would I have thought about any of those things until I've seen someone try to walk through that. And so I say that to say, I'm sure that there are some people here saying, I don't buy it. No. But I'm telling you, I've seen it too.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is, but it's real.
Yeah, there's a social disparity as well. What I told you is I got the unique opportunity as a African American child to go and live in more than one space with predominantly white culture. So just imagine, we couldn't because we went to school, and school is just what it is. But you go home and then you go to school and then that's it. But we went to church and predominantly African American community, all of that kind of stuff. But like, there is an intimidation of this right here. This right here is an intimidation. What did I say was the biggest thing that was a struggle for me once I was 19 and living in Europe with 25 other Danish people, but also predominantly white people. I was the only African American. What was the struggle? Is, man, you don't know how to handle yourself in this kind of environment. You're nervous, you're fearful. Somebody might say something. Somebody might say they don't understand you. That's hard. We learned the King's English. That's a real phenomenon. Code switching, that's what it's called, is that I can go into this environment and talk, but I can also go to Harlem now and hang out with the boys on the block, and it'd be no problem to go back and forth. And then it looks like I'm two different people. No, I'm actually the same person, but there's a climate and a culture here that I'm sensitive to, that in order for you to be involved in the conversation, I have invited you by the way that I use my language. Second, not everybody can do that. Not everybody can do that. And so we get to college. We get to places, higher institutions. We go to a bank to open up a bank account, and we're wearing clothes, and we've got a haircut, and we're doing all these things, and we're trying to have a sense of dignity about ourselves, but it's still hard. It's still hard to just, can you just do what I asked you to do? Like, why is there this weird kind of thing? And then not everybody had the opportunity to have white people in their home. Not everybody got the opportunity to be discipled by a white guy from an upper middle class family who was able to go to houses on McGregor and chill out and see how they live life, so that I could then, when I went back to church or I went to school, now I could swag a little bit with white people because I knew their stuff, but they ain't know my stuff. And so that's not everybody's reality. So when you see an NFL player and he talks like he talks, and he uses ebonics and slang, and you're saying he's at a press conference, he should know better? How? How? He doesn't know the intricacies of all of this in the fast pace of which a conversation could happen. So I've been discipled in white culture in order that I would glorify God in this. I don't think the reason we don't have a lot of dudes that are planting churches in inner city neighborhoods, like the one I'm going to, is because they can't do this. They can't go to a white church and have a conversation because they don't know what to say. They don't know the jargon. They don't know the culture. They don't have the bridges to build, to make the connection. And so there's this chasm. And so I think that's a simple barrier, and that's a very big barrier here in South Florida, where this is a very Southern culture, very traditional culture. And so that's a big barrier that a lot of people just won't cross. And if you do see people like that, they're very braggadocious. They're very rough. Because they don't care about you. They're going, you're not going to accept me, so I'm not going to try to talk like you. You're just going to have to deal with me. And so that's a barrier, I think.
That's good. So that leads us to the area of privilege, I think. Am I right in that?
Yes.
So you have had to grow up learning how to talk in a couple different worlds. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure other folks in this room would feel that same way. So whatever the background is. And so part of my privilege is that I haven't had to learn that. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I'm scared to death to go into a context that is predominantly black and try to talk like black people talk.
Don't do that.
Don't do that, right?
Don't do that. Yo, homie G, hey, bro. No,
yeah,
don't do that.
Yeah, there's a little slew foot over there.
Yeah, no, whoa, don't do that.
There's a little fathead.
Yeah, don't do that, don't do that.
Sorry, that was from this morning.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I haven't had to do that. And so if I want to keep things comfortable, I'm going to continue to keep in place a culture where I don't have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, none of us would probably say that we do that. None of us would say we're fighting for a system that we don't have to be made uncomfortable or do those things. But we probably do in many different ways.
Yeah.
So talk about privilege from your perspective and push our buttons a little bit.
Oh, push your buttons.
But be careful. Because we got a lot of questions to get to in the
I
next section.
want to go fast. I'm gonna try anyway. There's just some benefits to living life in a majority white context that you just don't have to think about or think through. There's just some privileges, and I know that sounds like a loaded term, but listen, as a man, I don't ever have to worry about being somebody raping me. That's a privilege I have. I don't think about being vulnerable. As a man, I don't have to worry about, man, it's 9 o'clock. Do I go to Publix tonight? There might only be a few cars. Man, no, I'm gonna go get some ice cream. I don't care. I'm not worried about that. As a man, I'm not concerned about that. That's a privilege that I have. None of us, I don't see anyone in here with a wheelchair, but I don't know, none of us were concerned that they didn't have ramps coming up. We just walked up. We just assumed that this is how life is supposed to be because I have 2 legs, 2 eyes, 2 arms, and I can do what I want. I can get there without any.
We do have an elevator. Just
we do
to be
have
clear.
an elevator.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, we're going.
But in my mind, that's a privilege. We have a privilege that we have something that we don't have to worry. That I don't have to think about that. Am I being represented? And so, man, and then we learn that, growing up, there was a tension, and this ain't this conversation yet, but there was a tension. I was nervous about police stopping me as a teenager. But my friends who would smoke weed and drive around and drink, they weren't concerned about that. I am concerned about being perceived as a thug if you don't know me. A lot of my posture is just second nature now. A lot of my posture is open. I smile a lot because I hate the feeling of a lady clutching the purse when I walk by. I've done these things. This is second nature to me now. That I would do things and be concerned about things. I would be aware of the nuances in the conversations. I could read emotion. These are things that I am just thinking through. What are the things I need to say to this registrar as I walk into Edison, making sure that I cover all the bases and I'm not looked at as some black dude. That she would just receive my application with just square, just as it is. And so there's privileges that come with that. Now, as well, I hear a lot of the stories where, people say, my father came to this country or my grandfather came to this country and, he started a business and he worked hard and he did for himself. And so, I'm an entrepreneur or I'm a businessman. And so that's our family lineage. That's our legacy. And that's kind of how we roll. That's a privilege. Because my grandfather worked hard too. But he wasn't allowed to buy a house and gain equity and pay for his children's education as a result. He couldn't invest the same way because he wasn't allowed to go to certain parts of town and do business in certain banks and do those certain kinds of things. So the things that set you up for whether you took it or not, I just didn't have the option. The biggest dream my father had for me was that he buy a house that we could live in. And so we live in our Habitat home in 7120 Church Street. That was his legacy. But that was 59 years. At 59 years old when he passed away, that's a privilege that you can hand down equity and then they can build if they choose to. But what if you don't get the option? That's a privilege. And so I'm not saying that everyone is born rich. I'm not saying that everybody has the same swag. No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying that there's certain considerations and things and nuances of life that I'm just not worried about that. It just doesn't bother me. And so that mental fog and tiredness is a privilege that many white people have that they don't even realize.
Do you think it's the same for Hispanic culture? I'm not asking you to speak for them, but in your opinion, do you feel like white people have privilege, primarily Hispanic and black individuals. And first of all, do I say black?
You can.
Okay.
With me.
Okay. But some I need to say African American.
I don't know, man.
I don't
just
either.
Ask them.
I don't. Oh, just ask them?
Yeah.
Done that before and it hasn't gone well.
Yeah, well, you know.
Okay, just ask them. I'm going to do it. So you think Hispanic, black, African American culture, primarily in the areas of privilege, have less than white?
I do.
Same amount of lessness, if that's a word?
It's different.
Okay.
I think, for me personally, I think an immigrant comes in with a different kind of understanding of American life.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have the same kind of historical baggage, maybe that our family did. And so he's not navigating, worried about how he's perceived. I just need a job. So we would grow up making fun of Jamaicans because they had 3 jobs. They're leveraging the opportunity to come to this country and get as many jobs as we can. Same for black and brown people. So all my best friends were Puerto Rican. So they would start businesses, landscaping businesses, and leave something to their family. And so there is those perceptions. But I would say, man, an immigrant comes in with a different mentality to leverage what is here right now. I think an African American just kind of, me personally, we have baggage that we're dragging along into this conversation. Sure, there's tons of opportunities, but there's still a lot of this stuff that is near and dear that hasn't been addressed, that we're still kind of wrestling through. A lot of internal 400 years of oppression and ostracization and being outside and all those things. Man, grandma had stories, the songs that we sing in church, all those things. Man, that's a lot of baggage. And so it's not as easy just to come in with a clean slate and just go, I'm going to just go get a job, get an education, and do what I want to do. I would hope that more would, but it's still very difficult to turn that corner.
That's good. So some people might hear us talking about privilege and they'd say, wait a second, so I feel like my privileges are being taken away. So talk about getting into college. Maybe there are certain programs that they would accept a black student over a white student, or jobs, affirmative action, all of that kind of stuff. Let's open up that box if we want to get there. And someone might say, well, that day is over. The day of white people having more privileges than black or Hispanic or anybody else, those days are over. What would you say to them?
I disagree.
Okay.
There's an accumulation.
Yep.
There's accumulation over time. So there's accumulation over time. This is stuff that's stored up. Mm-hmm. So for now, like, we talk about the prosperity gospel in the black church, and we kind of make fun of that kind of stuff. Man, black people couldn't get into seminary until the 60s. Mm-hmm. Most of the pastors are illiterate. Oh, so all of a sudden now they're supposed to have MDivs and know all the theology and all of this? Nah. Yeah. And so there's an accumulation of stored benefits that, man, just, and we have to go back. Man, listen. The GI Bill was for veterans that were coming back from World War I, World War II. That was their ability to buy homes, get an education, and do benefit for their children for putting in service. Well, what about my uncle who also got the GI Bill, but he couldn't go to school and he couldn't buy the house? There's been an accumulation over time of now the equity from all those years that now I just want I want a shake at the table. And there is at some point, it's not a handout, but this is just a natural, and I think that's a point. Here we go. Is, man, we want it to be equal for all. And so I think there's not, I don't want what's yours. Just give me a fair shake at the table in whatever sphere it is, so that I'm going, man, you have some things. Yo, calm down. I'm not here to steal your stuff, but we have been in a much lesser position. So to now say, now you just run the same race. Nah, we can't run the same race. And so there's been some disparities that I think will take a lot of time, a lot of government help, a lot of Christian help, a lot of ingenuity and creativity to help, man, hopefully my grandkids can walk at the same pace as anyone else's grandkid.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Amen. You're doing great. You're doing great. And I would like to just make a note that when I ask a question, like some would say this, it's not me who would say
No,
it.
it's okay. It's okay, Jamie.
Oh, no.
It's okay.
No, as I, when I think about privilege, like the thought that there are people alive today that at one point they weren't allowed to vote, that blows me away. Because I think when I think about it, I think, oh, that's so far in the past, but it's not really that far.
It's not.
Is it? Yeah, and so I mean, I'm absolutely blown away when I think about it in that context, and to think about kids in the South in the '60s and all of that kind of stuff. And so I want you to know I agree with you. I do think that there's an accumulation of things, and so I think it's kind of ridiculous for us to say, well, it should all look, it's all equal now.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we got to learn. I really do.
And listen, God made allotment. God made allotment for that with the people of Israel. There were times where you have the year of Jubilee, where old debts were severed so that you could begin to build for your family again. That if you were in exile, that if you did have accumulated wealth, that if your fields were lush and you had a harvest, that you were supposed to leave several rows on the outside so that someone could come along and also glean from the outside. So it wasn't that we just had this, that it's just that. No, the Lord had set up in the government of the people of God that there would be ways in which we could become equal. So that if you had sold yourself into slavery, you didn't have to remain there forever. You were able to get out and then put your children in a better position. And so I think that's the fear, but we have to remember there are biblical principles here that still can help us. And then at the same time, listen, we talked about the book of Acts today. Most of millennials in particular will point to the book of Acts in chapter 2 and say how everyone had everything in common. When we start talking about everybody having everything in common, now all of a sudden when it's my stuff, I'm nervous. And so you want a perfect church, but you don't want to live in such a way as we can all have. The poor didn't have need because the church said, we got you. And so as a Christian, and I want to make sure I emphasize that, as Christians, we ought to think differently about how we operate, how we think through capitalism, how we think through history, how we think through economics, and all these things, because the gospel, Jesus, the Bible has something to say about how we can operate in this complex society.
That's really good. That's really good. So let's talk about power. You and I talked on the phone last week, and with this one specifically, you're like, man, I want to be careful with this because I don't want people to think I'm coming at them. And, we have cops and first responders here who want to be faithful. And you have people who are in power here. I even think of this church. I'm an elder of this church. We have no African-American representation as an elder at this church or on staff. So I look and I say, okay, I'm a part of that structure as well. So just talk about power and what's important for us to see and how we see it through the lens of the cross.
Yeah. First is God has set up authority. So if you're a police officer, man, Romans 13 is for you. Like, we submit to our governing authorities. So I'm not in agreement if you're watching TV or CNN or something and they're saying we need to get rid of police. No, because I know we have sinful hearts and that we will kill each other if given the opportunity. And so we need people that will protect us. I think if you're a husband, it is your job to protect your wife and your children and your home. He has set up authority. And so I'm not anti-authority, but at the same time, when I go before Jesus and I will be judged more strictly on how I ordered my home than my wife will. So there is a responsibility that comes with power, that comes with a higher expectation and standard. And so as we discuss power, it's a natural thing. It's just a natural created order thing. So I believe it. I love it. I seek to submit to my elders at my church. I seek to do what I can to submit to the laws of this land. So power is a natural and necessary reality. So I'm not saying, and if you're a police officer, you do a phenomenal job by putting yourself on the line for those who are weak and need to be protected.
Amen.
Same with veterans. I mean, we've got uncles that are military personnel. Man, thank you so much for protecting the things that we call dear. And so I'm with that. But at the same time, when it comes to power, there is an expectation of love and service and care and concern. Not blatant disregard, not I got to get my job done, not I don't care about those people. No. I'm supposed to love my wife like Christ loved the church. If I were to come into my home and say to my wife, you know what, where's my food at? What's going on in this house? It's filthy. Man, what the heck are you doing all day? I would pray that Jamin, my elders, would come kick my door down and say, what the heck are you doing? You're not to lead like that. But when it comes to power, I think when we get outside of that sphere, so I'm talking as a Christian. If you're an unbeliever, I get it. You don't understand. But I'm saying if you're a Christian officer, if you're someone in power as a Christian believer, there is a sense of concern and love and care that we should naturally have for those who we are in authority over.
Amen. So when we were talking, there was a question, this is the last question before we'll actually ask Orlando to come on up, that you brought up, that you wanted to make sure you talked about. Are minorities always the victim?
Nah. At some point, at every level, there is still responsibility. There's still responsibility. So Adam and Eve were deceived. They were set up. It was a bad deal. But at some point, Adam willfully chose to eat and disobey. So all of us have been born with a conscience. All of us God is a created order. Whether or not the circumstances are better for me or not, I still have a responsibility for moral uprightness. And so, there's that sense in which, I understand the deck is stacked against you. But we still have a responsibility to love, care, serve, teach, be prophetic, lead, change, sacrifice, all of those things. And so I just think, man, I don't like that it's always just that black people are the victims. No, we're not always the victim. We do have a will. We do have volition. We do act. And so, man, those acts I can understand maybe where they're rooted, but it doesn't excuse it. And so man, I wanted to share that because I think sometimes the way it kind of gets painted is that, man, black people are always crying wolf. They're always crying wolf. Nah, not necessarily. And I think I know a necessary, immediate connection is black on black crime. So y'all are worried about police shooting you. What about all this black on black crime? Well, what are y'all doing about that? Where are y'all going to march about that? When are you going to fight about that? Well, I know me personally, I put a sign on Gladiolus Drive 25 feet long saying stop the violence. I know me personally, I was on the board of the Harlem Heights Improvement Association where we fought because there were young men killing one another in the streets. I know me personally, I sat down with police officers asking for solutions like, what the heck is going on? How can we stop the violence that's happening in our communities? And that's not just there. We do the same thing in Camden at our church. I intend to do the same thing in Baltimore at our church. So internally, we don't get a lot of press for that, though. Ain't a whole lot of just, CNN news coverage for the community meeting with 50 grandmas weeping and praying and asking the Lord to help them to stop the violence in their neighborhood. But that's happening all day long, every day. My mom would get up at 5 o'clock, first week of the month, every month. They would get up and go to Mount Pleasant Missionary Baptist Church on the corner, and they would go in there 5 o'clock in the morning and weep and pray for Harlem Heights, that the poverty would stop, that the violence would stop, that young men would become fathers, that they would marry their baby mamas, that they would do all those things. But they ain't getting newsletters, they ain't getting no articles written about that. And so internally, I would say, yeah, there's responsibility, but internally there's also fighting. There's vigor given to the streets. Stop it, stop. I printed up stickers, put them on the stop sign. Stop the violence. And so, yeah, there is that stuff, but it's not as popular. It's not as popular, but we have a part to play in it.
It's good. We're going to move to the seat and the couch. It's the final portion of the evening. We just talked about power, and it's awkward that I'm going to be the one who sits in this one chair and force the two of you to sit over there. I apologize. I should have thought through that.
All right, well, we can switch. You can
No. I don't want to do that.
See?
No. I don't want to do that.
See?
Sorry. Somebody put towels up here for us.
Awesome.
So,
is it because I'm black?
I don't know. I didn't do it.
Yeah.
I didn't do it.
Yo, and then one last thing. Shout out to my wife who's out there on Facebook.
Hey, Aaron.
Love you. Shout out to Pastor Trev. You're texting me right now. I got the text. Thanks, bro. I need the encouragement.
Trev, how you doing?
I'm a little nervous.
Hey, by the way, Trevor just put out a new worship album with a team from Epiphany Camden, called, remind me of the name.
Crimson Stain.
Crimson Stain. Is that the name of the band or the album?
Both.
Okay, so Crimson Stain, get on iTunes, pick up Crimson Stain. You can get it through Bandcamp, right?
Bandcamp,
And,
iTunes,
all
all that. So
free plug, Trev.
you know, we got free mixtapes. We're selling them out front. You know, no problem. Yeah.
All right, let's move on. There are so many questions here that we're not going to be able to get to. I'm trying to kind of piece them together. So let's just start out with an easy one. To Orlando. So first of all, Orlando asked Orlando to be a part of this. As a man who grew up in Hispanic culture, is Dominican, but also operates in this world of a very white church. And one of my favorite stories about Orlando and his ethnicity, one day I was at his house and his wife Pam said, "I'd like you to get a cardigan sweater." She said, like Jamin. Jamin wears cardigan sweaters. And he goes, "You think I'm white?" And I was like, wait a second. Do I wear them because I'm white? I don't know. So anyways, what do the... Let's start out with
That's a true story.
It's a true story. There's no doubt. Now everything I wear, I'm like, is this because I'm white? I don't know. So Charlie and Orlando, I want to hear from both of you. As a godly leader, how do you respond and think about the Black Lives Matter movement? He waved.
Well, I think what we have to understand is everything that Charlie talked about tonight, right? So I think once we think about all of what African Americans, Black people have had to go through, I think that puts an understanding on what they are trying to get across, right? What they're trying to fight for. They're trying to put voice to a struggle. Now, that being said, I think there are some things that that have been tainted into the Black Lives Matter movement that kind of, again, that's all we're looking at. And I think that's what gets projected to the front. And for that, I think my burden is for that. Is to think, man, here is an opportunity for Black people in this country to come together and to challenge people of different races to take a moment to step back and to hear. and to be a part of the conversation and then to join in the efforts of the struggle. But again, because of, and I don't know enough about the Black Lives Movement, but it always seems to go to the fact, here is what is projected, here's all that we hear about, here's the only thing that the Black Lives Matter movement stands for. And I think that's a dangerous place to be.
There's a couple of things I would say is this. The statement, not the movement, the statement I agree with. And I think every Christian agrees with that as well. Black Lives Matter. Not the movement. That statement, you agree with that. We love all people, right? But in particular, black people matter. So I agree with that on that level. Everything else is highly politicized. Everything else is the movement, all that stuff. So I don't agree with the movement. I don't understand all their tactics. I don't agree with all of that. But I would hope as a Christian, you would immediately be able to say, at least in your heart of hearts, not on Facebook or not externally, but man, black lives do matter. And I want to see people thrive and do well in the world. And so I think you believe that, and that's true if you're a Christian. The second piece I would say is that young African American people don't have the same theological groundings as they once did. We would all like to talk about Martin Luther King and his movement and all the things that he did so great, but there were predominantly white churches that did not like his tactics. He was hated for the things that he was doing. If any of you ever read letters from a Birmingham jail, it was written to white pastors who were telling him to slow down. We don't like what you're doing. And so when we look at these things, I am concerned because I'm like, they're trying to get a point across, but it's not done in the way that I would want anything to do with. I don't agree with all their philosophies, all that stuff, but I do agree with, like I said, those three words, that Black Lives Matter, and I think that's where it's rooted. But as well, all lives matter. Come on, man. Like, well, hold on now. All lives matter. We like that, but listen, Susan G. Komen will have a 5K race for breast cancer down the road. Who will stand on the side of the road saying colon cancer matters? That's disrespectful. My sister just died of pancreatic cancer. Who would stand on the side of the road and say we shouldn't be talking about pancreatic cancer? You're diminishing the very statement they're trying to make. That immediately to say all cancer matters. Why are you talking about breast cancer? How many of you right now have pink t-shirts or pink bracelets and you would say, man, I know someone that's been hurt, that's suffered, that's died. And that's the same thing. No one goes to a Susan G. Komen rally of breast cancer and says, you know what? All cancer matters. We know all cancer matters. We assume all cancer matters. But at the same time, black lives truly do. As Christians, I'm not talking, as Christians, we believe that all lives matters. And in this conversation that we're having this night, Black lives matter as well.
And I think you hit on it. I think the tactics of the Black Lives Matter movement, that's what's getting lost.
Yeah, we don't agree with that.
And so what's getting lost is the fact that black lives do matter. And so now we're no longer having the conversation about race. We're having the conversation about a movement and about their tactics and about, they hate this, they hate that, they're against, and that's, and what's interesting, right? Yeah. Is this is exactly how the devil works.
That's exactly right.
And so we always have to remember there is a spiritual component to this as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like, we're not with that. I wouldn't affiliate with the Black Lives Matter movement. All right? As a Christian, I don't know if you can do that fully, wholeheartedly, and embrace all that they believe. I don't know if you can do that. I wouldn't do it. But I say, again, those three words, in the rawness of what they are, I think we can agree with as Christians. And we can go from there and have a conversation. Amen. And not get involved in the necessary new movement.
Amen. So the response of a Christian when someone is talking to them about Black Lives Matter, it's not to convince why that's wrong, but instead it's to embrace those three words, yes, Black Lives Matter, and then try to engage in the conversation, if we're Christians, toward Christ. Right?
You can do that. That's an easy bridge. I think that for an African-American dude that loves Jesus, I think that's the easy win for Christians. Like if you're white and you're going, man, they're making this big deal, man, that's an easy bridge because you should be able to say, as a Christian, you know what, I agree that Black Lives Matter. You know why? You know how much I know that Black Lives Matter? Because Jesus came and died for Black lives. And so, you know, I work, I serve, I give. You know what I'm saying? I give. You know what I mean? I partner with, Pick Up the Ball, and we go down to Dunbar because we believe Black Lives Matter. Therefore, we love those people. Man, so we're going to give all that we can because Jesus gave for Black lives. Like, that's an easy connection. But we lose it because we're so in a hurry to, whoa, all lives matter. Yep. Nah, and you've missed a gospel opportunity, especially for young people and African Americans that are hurting.
It's good, man. Yeah. Really good. Let's talk about police again, because I think this is an important question. So this individual writes in, I'm a spouse of a police officer. I pray continuously for law enforcement safety and how they interact with the black community. I'm praying to better understand how the community views the police. My husband became a policeman to help everyone. Please help me better understand this topic. So you said earlier that oftentimes you're afraid. I've seen you talk about, I'm not going to have a gun because I'm a large black man. Mm-hmm. I've seen you write that on Facebook. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about that. What's necessary in light of the gospel to validate the concerns that you have and to validate the honor that most policemen serve with? What's necessary for someone to know from your perspective?
I think what's necessary for someone to know from my perspective is I know culturally I am portrayed a certain way. I'm an individual. I'm not all black men. I'm not every stereotype you see. I'm not a gangster rapper. I'm not. And so these kinds of depictions that have become the cultural kind of standard for what an African American is or African American man is and how he acts, I would want to just be considered an individual. And so that's where I think there's fear. And that's why I say my posture. Now, this is me personally. Not everybody does this. Not everybody feels the need to do it. I want to have more conversations, but I think that there's a sense of conditioning that I have of fear and nervousness because I believe that there's a perception that law enforcement has of me because of the neighborhood I come from and grew up in. Had a godly mother who raised us in the admonition of the Lord. She taught us to care for people and feed people, but all you see is a black dude that listens to rap music. Therefore, he's a threat. That's the distinction that I see, and it's the same thing. I know a lot of law enforcement are saying we're being painted in this bad picture, that we are being polarized, and that's not how we are. And I'm saying the same exact thing. That I don't want to, I've gone to police summer camp. I've had great police officers. We've talked, we've had relationships. I was going to be a police officer at one time. Things were, so it's not that. And so I know there's good police officers. So I don't want to be painted with a broad brush, and I don't want to paint all police as evil, and they're ignorant, and they're just looking to kill some black guy. But in the culture that we're living in, that's volatile, that's nerve-wracking, and a father who grew up in the Deep South, a mother who grew up in the Deep South, Charlie, you do everything that you can to get home. You say, yes, sir. You say, no, sir. You do exactly what he does. Now, my black friends will tell me I'm selling out for doing that. But I love my family enough not to make sudden moves and talk trash to police. And so that's that. And so I love and commend police officers for their work. But the same fear, the same apprehension they are feeling is the same apprehension and nervousness I feel that I'm being painted the same way.
That's really good. My brother's a police officer, as you know, and we have this discussion, and one of the things that, again, that doesn't get talked about is that the police are trying to bridge that. So at his department, they're doing a lot more within the community. They're constantly now wanting to bridge that gap, understand, bring discussion. I see his police department, they post these videos. I'm like, man, these are so stupid, they're silly. He goes, yeah, but it humanizes us.
Yeah.
I don't want to be seen as an individual. I don't want any of our residents, whether they believe black, white, Chinese, Dominican, to think or be portrayed as this, when that's not what we got into this for.
Yeah.
So.
It's good. Aaron, anything you'd add to that? You can say no. Aaron is a former cop, so.
Turned pastor.
Yeah. Come here real quick. Sorry.
White man telling another white man what to do. I love that.
Can I not do
Get
that?
uphill.
Yeah, man, Charlie's just good. Some of the stuff that you were just talking about, I mean, that really has been something for me just to ponder. So I did spend a lot of years in law enforcement. And it's interesting, so I started that about 25 years ago when the movement was towards community policing. At the same time, so that was, get into your community, really know, and that was supposed to be a proactive way we were going to change the way that things were going to really go in our communities. But at the same time, I'll never forget, in every criminal justice class I had in college, every academy class, we were taught there is a constant threat, and you may die today, constantly. And so, man, one of the reasons that I even left law enforcement is I began to have a skewed view of people. So not just African American, but people in general, because you were told continuously, man, it's a lot better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
Yeah.
And that was constant. And so you then begin to approach every traffic stop, every domestic violence call that I want, and everything as in terms of how are they attempting to hurt me.
Yeah.
And that makes you jaded.
Yeah.
And what I saw over the years then is law enforcement becomes its own community, its own brotherhood.
That's right.
It's them against us all of the time. And while that's not necessarily true, you can't see it while you're in the middle
when
of
you're
it.
in it.
You just don't see it.
Yeah.
And so I know that this whole thing that we see going on in our culture, like I struggled with that because I'm like, I never went out one day in my life and said, man, if that guy is an African American, I'm going to stop that car. Like I never thought that. And yet at the same time, I can see how that transpires in our culture, in our community, why people are leery of the police, because every time that I approach him, I'm like, man, I don't want him to think that I'm doing this just because he's an African American.
Yeah.
And so I think that, just kind of in final thoughts here, I really think that we do need to have more discussions.
Yeah.
I think that most law enforcement officers are really, and they seek the best for their community. They really do. And I think that there needs to be some additional, I don't want to say the word training, but there needs to be some conversations that say there's probably a lot of things that you don't understand, and I would say to even a lot of folks of any ethnicity, there's a lot of things you don't understand about law enforcement. There's a culture that we've created there. Some's good, some's pretty unhealthy.
And what's interesting about what he just said is that's exactly how dudes in the hood think. That's the same, there's a constant threat, white people. The outside, if you're not from my neighborhood, it's a constant threat. And I'm nervous about that black dude from that neighborhood or wearing that color or from that set. And so now there's become this internal kind of, everyone is kind of outside, but we don't have the law, the authority on our side. So when you started out to get money by selling drugs so that you could help feed your family, now it's become everybody's a threat, and I have to keep everybody out, and I have to. But now there's not the support of law enforcement, and so there's a similar kind of thinking that goes into it that we have to, as Christians. This is the only thing I say. As Christians, Christ has to come in and do the rewiring. He has to come in and help me to see that, this is my neighborhood isn't the only thing. The police aren't the only culture or the only group. I'm a part of a family of people. And therefore, I have a responsibility in a way I'm supposed to carry myself, but also think in how I treat people that's supposed to be unique and different.
It's good. It's really good. Yeah, I caught that as Aaron was talking. So your parents are saying to you, don't get killed. Do everything you can to come home. And
From black dudes and the police.
Yeah, and I know that police officers, the fear of their spouses and families, and understandably so, is don't get killed. Come home.
Yeah.
Do everything you can to come home. And
yeah.
When you show up, the disaster's already there.
Yeah.
So the conversation, for me, has to move to, there has to be, and I believe the church is the avenue for that.
Yeah.
That actually is going to bring systematic change.
Yeah.
it's really good, Aaron. It's really good. Aaron was saying, for those who can't hear, that police officers, so often they go into situations and they have to be reactionary, and that brings about certain things. And so there has to be systematic change in how we deal with things, and the church is really the conduit and the avenue to lead that. It's really good. My phone is blowing up about what was in Aaron's red Solo cup. So, but we're going to get to that in another time.
I was thinking the same
It's like
thing. You brought the
blowing
cup
up.
here.
Ask him about the
That was
cup.
awesome.
Ask him about the cup. Yeah, that's right. It's just water. Let's talk politics. Tell us how to vote. No, not really. No. So here, two questions specifically. So one person is asking, okay, I am of a certain political bent, more so because of economic issues and things like that, but I'm automatically, like, when I talk to someone of color, of a different race, they automatically assume I'm racist because I'm voting in that direction. That's one. And another, which is a question that I have that someone else asked, and I think it's a great question. As the presidential election draws near, I feel deeply troubled as my Christian views of being both pro-social justice, but also pro-life seem to be in conflict. In your opinion, is it better to not vote at all or vote for someone who clashes with my Christian convictions? You don't have to go there,
Good
but let's
night.
just...
Come
So,
on.
but
We got
the
5
reality
minutes.
is, many in the black community would say, we're going to vote in this trajectory, and they're focusing on the social issues of what they've experienced over the past. And others would say, well, no, pro-life is that issue that's a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to go to any. So first, the first question is this.
I lost you after the first
You
question.
did? Okay, so the first question is this. If I vote, this person's saying, I think that they're
I'm automatically
saying,
being
I vote Republican, and when I am talking to someone who is black or of another ethnicity, they assume something about me that's not true.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I say, as a Christian, man, listen, our main flag that we wave is Christianity.
Yeah, that's good.
The faith. So, like, so I know that's hard, but
I'm sure this person would say I do.
Yeah, and so I know, but then there's certain assumptions, but that's where the relationship and the conversation has to come in real quick. Because listen, historically Martin Luther King was Republican, Frederick Douglass was Republican. Like, there's historic great figures that are African American that were Republican. Now things have happened. Things have switched. There's been all kinds of stuff that's happened. Democrats were the ones who were against freeing slaves and Jim Crow laws and enacted Jim Crow laws and all those kinds of things. So that's a reality. But things switched, and socially we are where we are. And so you kind of gotta handle the baggage of the term, okay? But if you have love and you have a conversation, man, you can get through some of that, because most African Americans would say, I don't want you to take all my stuff. I don't want the government all involved in all my stuff. So there's some philosophical things that everybody can kind of agree with. And then at the same time as well, we are Christian. I think this political climate now will define us as Christians or not. If you're one of those, I'm hardline Democrat, I don't know how you can do that as a Christian. If you're hardline Republican, I don't know how you can just full on embrace this whole philosophy of how the world should work, and then Christianity is just kind of a bubble outside of that. Because when we look at the scriptures, as I said earlier, there are democratic principles and there are Republican principles all intertwined into our Christian faith. So we can't stiff arm one and say we're all this. And so there's a cool campaign out, I'm not too much about it, but it's called the AND campaign, where there are people, particularly African Americans and urban folks, that are saying, you know what, I am pro-life, and I am also for, other stuff that, we need government assistance, or we need health care. You can be both. Why? Because we're Christians walking in a complex world, and God has called us to be exiles in this world, and so we're distinct, we're different. We can't be like everyone else. And so it's going to be a complicated one for us to choose a candidate. And so I don't know what you should do, but I think it's going to be a hard road this November in the climate that we're in. No matter what candidate or what party you're a part of, I think Christians have an opportunity, though, to kind of rise to the occasion to show our distinctiveness in the midst of this chaos.
Yeah, and I think that was awesome. You've done great tonight, man. This as a pastor, these kinds of questions are, to be honest with you, are frustrating to me, because these are awesome opportunities for the gospel. And I think when we hear a question like that, we immediately jump to the realm or the ring of going, I have to now defend what I'm not, instead of going, well, how did you get to that conclusion? And if you read the Gospels, that's how Jesus interacted with people.
Yeah.
He didn't always have to defend what he was. He knew what he was. He wanted to know why you thought he was what you think he is.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, I think I said that right.
Yeah, you did.
Just go with it. Yeah.
But so, that's the thing. If someone's asking you, well, if you vote this way, then this makes you this. Don't feel like right away you have to jump to start. No, that's an open door to begin the conversation of going, that's interesting that you went to that conclusion. Let's have a conversation. How did you get there? And the reason this is important, because the next forum, you think this one's tough, and it is tough. The next forum it's going to open up a whole bunch of cans. It's going to open up so many different things that right now, as you think about the transgender issues and all of that, and so even that today, when we say we are a follower of Jesus Christ, it is no longer what we are for. It's now in this culture what we're against. And if we don't learn how to invite and participate in the conversation, we have now pulled ourselves to the sideline. And so these kinds of questions are great questions. Don't be afraid of them. But don't jump to the conclusion that you have to defend, instead of recognizing how is it that you came to believe that.
Yeah, and I would add to that, look through every movement, affiliation, or party. When we were asked, what about the Black Lives Matter movement? I had to consider it, because I had to say, man, some of the things that they're saying I kind of agree with. I don't like kids being killed by police officers after 2 seconds. I don't like that. But what did I have to do? I couldn't wholeheartedly embrace this whole movement without considering it through the grid of the gospel. Let us do the same thing with our political parties as well. It's not just, I know, man, how they do. Nah, but we need to consider everything that we are affiliated with through the lens of the gospel, and realize that, man, We're just going to be unique and nuanced in a lot of ways that our contemporaries just won't. And that makes for us a cool opportunity, as we've been saying, to share the gospel and have dope conversations.
It's good. So it's 7:47. I said 7:45. I'm sorry. We're going to end at 8. If you need to go, certainly you are free to go. None of us will judge you for that. I know a lot of you have kids that need to get into bed. We get that. And we know you love black people if you leave. So don't feel like and Latino and white. Okay.
You said
All
that
lives
like
matter.
Latino.
No. Come on, man. I'm married to a Hispanic woman. Does that get me points or anything?
Yeah, it does.
All right, good.
Boy, you nervous, dog.
Oh, man, I'm so nervous.
It's
You're
all
doing
right,
I
good.
feel
man.
I've gotten
It's
through.
all right,
We're
bro.
almost
You
to
are
the end, and
good.
I haven't
It's all
said
right, bro.
anything really bad.
You are
Yeah,
doing
Oh, I
good.
feel it's coming.
I'm so
It's
proud.
coming. I'm going to say something stupid. No.
You are with friends and all the people watching online.
What do you think about white people or black people or Hispanic people or Asian people or
All lives.
Native American people, all lives? What do you think about adopting children of another race? What does that communicate? And someone also said on here, say more about Jesus. So try to add Jesus in there.
Oh, gotcha.
So I guess we're not doing that enough. So thank you
There's
for that
always one
reminder,
in the
whoever you
room,
are.
right?
So how do you feel about that? Like, where is the gospel in that? What do we need to know about that? Is it a good thing, bad thing? What does it communicate? All that stuff.
I have 2 adopted children,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously, man, children just need a home.
Yeah.
Every child should have a home, and as long as those parents feel called to adopt that child, who cares what color they are? Bring them home. Bring them home. Love that child, and if it is that this is the gospel, right? Man, can you imagine what heaven's gonna be like? Every nation, tongue, and tribe. Why can't we have some of that here?
Charlie, as a black man
Yeah.
who sees a lot of white people adopting black kids, cool with that?
Yeah, like he said, it's a gospel implication. It's a direct connection to the heart of God. That's a theological category that God has adopted wayward children and called them his own, given them a name, given them what they didn't have, and giving them a sense of dignity and life and purpose that only he could give. And so that's the natural default. Now, I also understand that, man, it looks trendy for white people to adopt little black kids. And so be wary of your motives in all of that, is what I would say. Be wary of the complexities that come along with that. I think a part of just how we think is we kind of think of black people as monolithic. We are not monolithic. We don't all think alike. We don't all come from the same background. We don't all think. So I think there's just this kind of, nah, it's okay, there's some complexities that come along with that. There's some sacrifices that will be made as a result of that. Like, I get the question from white parents like, man, I got this child, what do I do? And I think that's great, because what you've not done is said, I know how to raise a black child better than anyone else. You've considered who the child is and said, man, for his comprehensive well-being, I will consider all these things so that I can best love them. And so, as a good father, as a good mother. And so I would say, man, if you're in a position to adopt a child, do it. Third thing I would say, I don't know how many I'm on now, is, man, listen, African American people have been adopting children for a long time. We just don't call it adoption. You just stay at our house.
Can I add to that, though? Because here at Summit, this is what you just said is huge. So we have an Every Child initiative. We have an adoption fund, and it is trendy. And we make sure, we interview everybody. So make sure there's a gospel call in this.
Yeah.
Because the road is long.
Yeah.
My daughter's birth father is Mexican, And so she's learning about ethnicities in school. My kids have an open adoption. They know their birth parents. They know where they're from. And it was the first time this summer that she's now identifying herself. We went to the beach. We were with Jamin's family. We were at the pool. And she's like, I don't need suntan lotion because I'm not from this country. I'm like, no.
You're pouring down the road.
Like, let me lotion you up. Like, but there is now going to be discussions, right? Like, when you bring a child into your home from a different ethnicity, you got to understand, like, that child is still not of you. Mm-hmm. And no matter how much you want to make that child of you, that's not going to happen. And so some of that we need to de-romance and understand this is a gospel call with gospel implications. And there are things, you guys know, there are things that we're going to have to deal with, be ready to deal with, and trust the grace of God to see us through.
Yeah, and so I would say practically is this. If you are looking to adopt a child that is not of your same culture or ethnicity, be willing to walk with that child in understanding that culture and ethnicity. As an African American who may or may not grow up in a predominantly white home, he will deal with hardship when he gets around African American and white children. And if you've not properly prepared your heart and soul and mind, why do the black kids call me white? And why do the white kids not accept me because and they say that I'm black? That's going to be a hard conversation to have if you've never even thought about it. And so I encourage you to step into that complexity because it's going to be hard. And so, like you said, that's a gospel call. And so we want to see children come up out of foster care, come up out of just being in these homes where they're a number. We don't want that. And so if you have a home, but be willing to do like Jesus does, deal with us in all of our mess.
It's good, man. We got to move on.
Yes.
Give me a 30-second answer. I'm telling you, I'm going to cut you off.
Thank you.
Why is it okay to have BET, Miss Black America, Congressional Black Caucus, etc., but not okay to put white in front of any of it? Doesn't it cause more division? 30 seconds.
It does not cause more division.
Okay.
We didn't have anything.
Okay.
So we created other things so that we could have something. So his black church is because he was put out of a white church and could not worship with the white people. So established the African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME, the traditional black church. Couldn't worship in the same house. Couldn't go to the colleges. So you know what? We'll create our own colleges. So we'll create our own organizations because the white majority won't allow us to come in. Plain. It's not that we created this because we just like it. Nah, it's because there was a segregation. There was a separation. And so black people sought to establish their own things.
That's good. All right. I saved
So white people created that stuff.
Oh, okay. No, your 30 seconds is over. Back down, man.
Yeah.
All right, now I'm going to change the last question. I'm going to give it to you. Colin Kaepernick and the national anthem. We have a couple minutes. Help us understand what's behind it, whether you agree or don't agree. I'm not even asking you to tell me if you agree or don't agree unless you want to. Tell me what's behind it. It's not just people being disrespectful. There's something more. So what is it?
No, it is everything that we've been talking about. It's the fact that it seems like we African Americans aren't being heard when there's these cries for help and acknowledgement. Dr. King said a riot is the voice of the unheard. It's a society-wide, it's a community-wide temper tantrum. It's your child going, hey, can I get something to eat? 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 And so finally, they throw something to get the attention. Now, it's not right. It's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be patient, but there's those things. And so he's protesting lives being lost at the hands of the police, and seemingly they go unpunished. And so you have so many police shootings with African Americans. Many are justified statistically, they say. And so you have these situations, but you have other situations that are questionable, and Baltimore, where we are moving, Freddie Gray died in the back of a van. He broke his own neck, and no one is responsible for that. How is that supposed to make me feel? That if I'm locked up on a small petty crime, that if I die, no one will be held responsible. And so that's the protest, but I would also say you push into the same things they said to Dr. King. The same things. Why would you come into our institutions and sit here? Why would you go to these places and do this? You are disrupting. Don't you have respect for the order of the day? And the truth of the matter is we are Americans. He is free to express himself how he believes fit. And now we are talking about it in this church at this time because he sat down. Rosa Parks sat down when it was against the law for her to sit down in a certain place. And so he's there doing that. I don't know if I agree or disagree, but I think he's got the right to do that. We're happy he's doing that because he's living out the fullness of what it means to be an American. He's not under threat of being murdered. He's not under threat of being killed. He's not being thrown in jail. He's got the right to do that because we're Americans. And so I would say, man, listen. That's what it is. I want the attention so that I can get on a microphone and say what needs. I just want to bring up this issue so that we can deal with it.
Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, no, I think it's attention, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we love is the fact that we have all these freedoms. And then once somebody uses their freedoms in a way that we don't like, that's attention for us.
Yeah.
And the reason I've been praying about this is because I really do think that we are living in a day and age where we in this room, if not we in this room, our very children, their rights as Christians are going to be challenged.
That's right.
In a way that you and I have not experienced.
That's right.
And so when that day comes, I don't want to be seen as hypocritical or two-faced because I'm going to expect my kids, I'm going to expect this church to not follow the regime.
That's right.
And to stand for something that's greater. And so it's a touch. And so I don't know if I fully agree or not, but at the same time, I've got to recognize that if I love freedom, then I have to love it in all its forms.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's been a great night.
It has.
Before we leave, it's 8 o'clock right now. I promise we're going to get out by 8:02.
Yes.
So
we're preachers. It happens.
So tell me the way. Just quickly, tell us some steps moving from here. Specifically, 2 things. What are some resources where we can understand this better, or some places to go online, or books to read, or people to talk to? You don't know the answer to that, maybe. Okay. Second thing is then how do we leave here tonight, wanting to take active steps to engage with people in the conversation, whether it be a white person wanting to talk to black people more about this? How do we do that?
I'll just give you one, and I told Jamin this. Growing up in a Hispanic family, here's how you connect. Just hear their story. Yeah. If you know my mom, the first thing she's going to want to tell you to test whether or not you really want a relationship with her is she's going to tell you part of her story. And the minute that you acknowledge that struggle, whatever, and it is a struggle, that invites her in. And so for me, it would be that. Like, just be willing to listen to somebody, because it's hard, right? We will want to see it through our lens and go, well, did that really happen? Yeah, it did. So once we begin to listen, we begin to gain some credibility. We begin to open up the door to further conversation and further understanding. So ask the right questions, but then be willing to hear their answers without your biases.
Yeah. Google. Listen, white people, listen to me. And I'm being serious, listen to me. There are other narratives. There are other stories. There's a broader history to our great nation, to our personal families, to our lives. I look at those Ancestry.com commercials and I look at that, I can't do that. But there's stories that you have not had the opportunity to consider. So Google is a great asset to you. Amazon.com is a great asset to you. We throw around Dr. King's name all the time, but have never read his words. And so I would say to you, go and read a book. Anyone on these topics, because there's just too much to name. So I'm telling you Dr. King, I'm telling you anything, James Baldwin, to understand the plight and the feelings of African Americans. There's so much new stuff being written right now. The new Jim Crow on poverty in the inner city and mass incarceration, all these different things. Nobody by Mark Lamont Hill. I don't care what you think about his politics. He has got some profound things to say, all those kinds of things. So read and consider those things. Second, if you don't like to read, Netflix. Netflix has documentaries for days. My white wife, who doesn't really know black people all that well, but lives in a black home, raised a black child, all those things, you know what she sat up and did last night for 4 hours? She watched The New Roots. Sat on the bed crying, considering that storyline again. We went to the library and got the original Roots and sat down together as a couple and watched that storyline unfold. So, Google is your best friend, Netflix, documentaries to learn about all the different storylines going on. And I would say, I don't believe that you have to become a multi-ethnic church. I don't think you have to do that. Please don't go to Dunbar or to Harlem or to Pine Manor and go bust some kids in because we're trying to be a multi-ethnic church. Don't do that. But the way you will organically become multi-ethnic is because your relationships become multi-ethnic. Who's at your dinner table? Who's been to your house? Not I got one black friend. No, don't do that. You get a real genuine, they've been to your house, they love you, they've spent time, genuine. Or you sacrifice your comfort. I applaud my brother Ted, sitting on the front row with 2 young men he brought from Dunbar. Amen. He has sacrificed, sacrificed his privilege, sacrificed his power, sacrificed his career, all of those things, leverage those things so that he could reach those young black men on the block. So you ain't got to, listen, a white dude from Wisconsin discipled me. So you don't have to be black and know all Drake and Meek Mills and listen to rap and all that. You don't got to do that. You don't got to talk black. You ain't got to do all of that. You got to have some raw love and be willing to be uncomfortable and go places that seem a little tense. But man, genuine concern, the love of Christ, you can do a lot of things with what you have right now. And so that's what I would commend.
Can I read this quote that I sent to you? You brought up Martin Luther King Jr. It's a quote from 1963. He says, "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is in the presence of justice, who constantly says, 'I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action,' who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of good is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection." So I read that because I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight.